can be. And I have a business where I help people of all ages. And in my business, I encounter, of course, all kinds of people. And the worst one I encountered, I ran it back in my mind how this was set up. Somewhere in life, when we become parents, we basically have to set an example for our children. If we run around like a ragamuffin, so will our children. Our lives will be difficult, to at least, because the world gives us an opportunity to make one first impression. You never have an opportunity to make a first, second impression, right? It usually is already somebody is opinionated about you. We carry that through our lives, and it sets us up for who we become. And the end result could be devastating. I got a call from a man, it was like about 4 years ago, and he said, I need you to come down and sit down with me. We need to make some changes on, in his case, it was his life insurance. Because he had become diabetic and things were changing, and he somehow felt it was necessary. So we sat down, and I said to his wife, would you please join us? And she said, oh, no, I can't do that. And I said, well, this is important because, you know, this is your husband making provisions for you. I feel really bad about this. And I said, you shouldn't. It is really for your benefit that we are doing this. So please take my invitation and join us. Well, she sat down. She looked at nothing. She just sat there the whole time like this. Now, this was a lady in her late 60s. And I could not help but feel sorry for her because she had never in her life made one decision. And it was obvious because she was overwhelmed by the simple thing of her husband saying, this is what's going on. Well, it only took a year and her husband passed away. So again, I had to go see her. I had to bring her a very big check. I mean, it was a very big check. And of course, it's for me to help her understand what to do with it because every vulture that has to do with money is going to be knocking down her door. And she would not want to sit down with me unless her brother-in-law came over to be there. She did not say one word throughout the whole meeting other than hello and goodbye. He did all the talking for her. And to this day, she has not made any decisions. I don't fault her for that. I fault her parents for that. Because that's who made her be that way. And in her ignorance, she has lost a lot of money. She has no confidence. She is now in her early 70s. She's actually my age. Yes, I'm going to be 71 this year, so I'm happy about that. But it's just that it is, to me, it is terribly, terribly sad to have to encounter somebody that at any age, when you just have a normal conversation with them, that they are like this. They cannot settle down. They cannot even put their hands in their lap and keep them confined because they have no confidence because of their ignorance. So ignorance is tremendously, tremendously powerful. And I have 6 children. My children range in age from almost 50 to 11. And so right there, I have been trying to teach my children to be strong people. I don't think I have failed. I feel very good about that because I do not see my daughters like this. And I do not see my sons as being the ones that are making the decisions for the women in their lives or the people in their lives. They have learned to stand on their own. And the only way you can stand on your own is by not being ignorant. Ben Franklin said we are all born stupid, but it takes a tremendous effort to remain that way. And so right there, take the time you have on this earth, breathing and doing all kinds of things, to set a tremendously good example for yourself, because you look in the mirror every day. And if you don't like what you see in the mirror, you're the only person that can change that. And when you do that, you influence not only yourself, but the world around you. And the world needs strong people. There are enough sheep. We need some people who can stand up.
This is a funny ignorance story. 1994, city kid, driving from Denver to South Dakota with a 3-month-old and a friend driving our car. We're moving from tech school in Aurora, Colorado to Rapid City, South Dakota, Ellsworth Air Force Base. And so we drive. Now these are the days before GPS, before, you actually had a map, you had to read it, follow the signs. No one's telling you to do anything. So we went on our way, ended up going through some state park. I don't know which one it was. This story popped into my head when we walked in. I'm like, oh my God, I can do this one. So, we stop at some point. I probably had to go to the bathroom, I don't know. We stopped at some point, and there's buffalo roaming, because we're in South Dakota. My now ex-husband wanted to go up and see the buffalo. And I'm standing in the rental truck. My daughter's, securely snug in her car seat in the middle. Again, city kid, grew up in Boston. I basically yelled at him, get in the truck. Those things are going to eat you. So, okay, now I did not realize, being a city kid, that buffalo ate grass and not people. It was kind of funny. After the fact, I learned that they ate grass, but they can trample you. So I was still warranted in my concern for not having, my daughter's father die out in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota. But it was just funny in these days now where we have everything right at our fingertips with the cell phones and, Google. Like, I don't know, let's Google it. I say that 8 times a day at work at least. So it's funny to think back to those days where you just had to remember what was in here, maybe had read a book, if I thought, didn't realize we were going to South Dakota, didn't really think to look up on it. But I know, short story, but that was my ignorance story. Thank you.
I worked for several years over at Fairstone State Park, and I'm reminded by what I've heard already, a theme that went through amongst us. You just can't teach stupid. We're not in school anymore, so it's okay. And one thing comes to mind, then I'll tell my story. I wasn't there that night, but the deal was this lady had trusted her GPS to get her to the park. And if you're at all familiar with Fairstone Park, the entrance to Philpott parallels our entry road. In fact, they used to have a passageway in common, but don't anymore. Somebody should tell GPS people. That lady drove from one end to the other all night long till she ran out of gas. And our night ranger had to go get her. So my story is equally stupid, but I'm afraid potentially more dangerous. Those buffalo aren't going to hurt you unless you had a tuft of grass in your hand. But anyway, speaking, okay. You're familiar with Little River? Yes. Little River. It's right up there. By the way, does Little River rise in Floyd County? It does? Okay, that might explain a lot. In high school, 4 of us floated Little River, and it was cool. It was cool. It was typical teenage, and we didn't have this, and we didn't care, and we went on, and 4 of us started out, and 2 of us finished. But that's kind of typical, also. In fact, we kind of made, I don't know how, but Randy Carter, who wrote about Whitewater in Virginia, wrote me and asked for details of the trip. Sorry, I don't remember squat. Can't help you there. But anyway, a few years later, I'm married to my nurse. And a young friend in her neighborhood says, let's do it again. I'm going to blame it on Mel. It was Mel's idea. So let's do it again. Let's float down the river. And I said, sure. I believe at that time I was working at the hospital. Ann and I were at Montgomery County Hospital when it was brand new. And anyway, I was off for the weekend and said, let's do it. Let's do it. Well, Mel had a canoe and I had a John boat, which is a tin rectangle that's bound to kill you if you don't pay any attention to what you're doing. It doesn't belong on a river. It's not a canoe. It's not a kayak. No. So we were, as I remember, we put in at Little River Bridge. And have any of you floated down from there? You know, there's 2 days, 2 miles maybe, downstream from Little River Bridge. There's a place where there's a fault. Big boulders on either side, and this beautiful sandy beach, stream right. The water's split by 2 vertical rocks. Does this ring a bell? Okay. Boy, does it ever ring one with me. Well, when we floated it the first time, we'd stopped there, and it was really cool. I mean, this is a beach, big old rocks, beautiful place, and the water. You're about to say?
Yeah, I think it's gotten very small from all the flood.
Wait till I finish my story. Oh, the beach. I'm sure the beach is washed away. Yeah, I went back there with a couple of guys, and I wouldn't go through there. And he said, I'll show you. No sweat. He had an aluminum canoe. We recycled it. No, we didn't. He went over that fall between the rocks, and the bow of the canoe hit the rock below it. And aluminum canoes are triple thickness at the bow. But he caved it in a good shot. But anyway, that's not the story. So we floated on down there, and we came to the beach place, and we were going to spend the night, and it was really cool. We hadn't, by the way, paid a lick of attention to the weather forecast. Back in those days, super accurate, you know. Tail end of a hurricane was going through, and we didn't know it. And I have less than 2 minutes. I think I can do this. I slept under my boat because there was no other dry place and we didn't have tents with us. It was pouring down buckets, tag into the hurricane. Mel had it even worse. A canoe's only about as wide as your butt anyway, and he had turned his over and like that. I'd had the very good sense to turn my boat over at the bottom of the hill, so all night long I was dodging these little streams that were shooting by me, but what the hell. So the next morning we wake up, the water's higher. And by the way, if you've never had scrambled eggs cooked over a kerosene fire, you don't know what you're missing. It is a treat. The water was a little higher. Water volume levels increase incrementally in proportion to their heights. We were probably about to step into water that the flow might have been 3 to 4 times greater than ordinary. I was in my boat for less than 2 seconds. I hit the rock to the right. The rock to the right, downstream right, splits the water behind a big boulder into this eddy where I wound up. I lost my mom's best cast iron frying pan, my .22 rifle, the footlocker that my father brought home from Europe, and almost me. The boat swirled in the eddy. I was clinging to the rock. It repeatedly hit me in the back of the head, but I'm here today. Damn, it was stupid. It was stupid not to know how water level rise and how much they increase the flow. I hate to hear that the beach is eroded. It's still a pretty place. Thank you.
Ignorance is you don't know what you don't know. Stupid is you know what you know and you do it anyway. Right? We actually talked before we got here about plenty of stupid farmer stories. One that happened recently, but that's not what I'm going to talk about because this is about ignorance when we have lots of ignorant farmer stories. So my partner and I became farmers 6 years ago. Coming from completely disparate things. We were not farmers. We were good gardeners, and it's just like gardening on crack, right? So we said, what the hell, we'll be vegetable gardeners, and while we're at it, let's get some sheep. So we got sheep, and sheep eat hay. And we had 10 acres of hay. We're like, great. People cut our hay for us all the time. And then it was harder to get people to cut our hay. And we were like, hell, let's just buy a tractor and cut our own damn hay. Screw this. So we did. We got the equipment. We have our hay equipment, bought a tractor, started cutting our own hay. Fortunately, Donna has run heavy equipment in her life, so she's pretty skilled at that kind of thing. So that's not the ignorant part. So she knew how to do all that. So we go the first time out, we're like, okay, let's hook up we'd cut everything. Everything was ready to be baled. And we had gone through 4 balers, and all of you that are farmers understand that we square bale, which we also talked about. The square bales aren't really square, but that's beside the point. But we square bale so we can handle them ourselves. We put them up in our barn ourselves, which we did this past week. Thank you all for helping. We were on our fourth baler. And this one actually, had some promise. We were hoping it would work really well. So we backed it up, and as anybody that farms know, it takes a little bit of tweaking and wonking to put these things together, and you're always very grateful that you do not have an audience while this is going on because it's a pain in the ass. So we get the baler on there, and I go to get the pin. There's a pin that sticks down basically to hook it to the tractor, right? And there's a little thing called a cotter pin. Does anybody know what a cotter pin is? It's a little 39-cent thing that you kind of stick in the bottom so that the big pin doesn't come out. We have like 4 big pins, and I can't find a cotter pin. So it's like, well, shit, there's just a hole. I'll just get a piece of wire and stick it in there. I mean, it all works with gravity basically anyway. This is a very heavy piece of equipment. So I got a piece of wire, tied it off, we're ready to go. So our pasture is like this. And she's amazingly skilled and can ride like this. I can't do that. It freaks me out. So she's cutting, and this thing is baling like we have never seen bales before. We're like, oh my God, thank God, finally we have one that can actually bale hay. We're so excited about it. So Donna runs the tractor and is doing the baling, and I run the truck with a little trailer on it, and I pick everything up, and then I bring it down to the barn, and then we put it in the barn. So the pasture sort of runs east to west. It faces south, and it has a nice tilt to it. And I'm over here picking up hay, and Donna's over here baling. And when she gets down to one end, when it starts to get tight, she has to kind of back it up and then kind of come forward again. So I'm baling hay, and I hear the tractor coming toward me, but it's coming at a pretty good clip, which is not usually what happens. And the baler makes this kind of like this. And I'm not hearing any of that. I'm just hearing, we have a new tractor and an ancient baler. And the new tractor's just like, I'm like, okay. And she's coming up, and I'm like, hey. And I'm like, wow, there's no baler on the back of the tractor. That's kind of weird. And she stops, and she's like, ah, and she's got this big grin on her face, and like, can you come here for a minute? I was like, yeah, sure. So I drive the truck over, and I meet her, and when she had backed up, that little piece of wire, which had been going, had disappeared into thin air, and the pin had popped out, and the baler had come loose. And the other thing that connects it to the tractor, as most of you farmers know, is called a PTO. It's the power takeoff. And that thing actually has a safety release so that if something happens and this thing comes off, it just pulls out. It's like a sleeve, and it just comes off the thing. So the baler, which is not a small piece of equipment, had, and where she has to back up and go like this, and it all goes down like this, and it goes down into our garden. And our chicken coop and our house and our pond is further down. So the baler had gone boom, 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 and had taken out 2 things of chicken wire fence, and had deposited itself right on the new strawberries I had just planted, which we had never had strawberries before. So the thing is stuck, and chicken wire is, and balers have tines, like big forks, right? So this is all bent and messed up, and we're like, oh, shit. And it's in the dirt like this, and you got to go down like this to get it. So this is like this, and the tractor has to come down like this, and so we have to bring the tractor down with a chain, and lifted the whole thing up, and got everything together, and we got it together, and she started to pull it out. I was like, oh, thank Jesus, we did it, woo! And she got it up. There was still no cotter bin, by the way. She got it up, and it went boom, and the pin came back out, and the thing not only went to where it was, but it went further down and hit one of our row covers. And so it's sitting there, and then we get this phone call to find out that her father, who is this amazing mechanic, is coming to the house tomorrow. And I was like, oh, God, the last thing I need is LR telling me how to fix all this. But we were spent, so we're like, we need to have a beer, let's just move on. So we got up early in the morning, we did basically the same thing, got it up, pulled it out of all the mess, and it came out. Actually, what we did, sorry, forgot the ignorant part of the story. Right before that, we went to C.W. Harmon's. I don't know if you all know that. It's a great store here. It's our neighbor. And bought some 34-cent cotter pins, a bunch of them. Went back, did the same thing, jacked it up, put the cotter pin in, pulled the thing out. It was perfect. Donna got off the tractor. We stopped it. We were both weak in the knees. We cried. By the time LR got there, Donna was back on the tractor baling hay, and now we just go buy a whole lot of cotter pins anytime we're doing anything.
My husband Johan, and we also have visual aids. So if anybody wants photographic evidence during the break, we are happy to share. So. Just after Christmas in 2015, Johan and I embarked on an epic road odyssey through southern Africa. We had a rented white Nissan 4x4 that we called Snowflake, and it was packed with any and every kind of gear that you can imagine. Military guy. Good planning and all of that stuff. And so we started off in Pretoria, South Africa, which is where Johan is from. We drove through the Northern Cape province, stopping there overnight, and then we crossed into Namibia at this remote border post in a town called Rietfontein. Got gas in this dusty little town with literally one horse walking through the main drag. We spent 2 nights at a beautiful lodge in the Kalahari. We went out tracking Kalahari lions with the lodge manager, drove on to the capital city of Windhoek for a couple of days, and then across to the Atlantic coast to a beautiful town called Swakopmund. And so we spent New Year's there, and we were having a great time. And so then, of course, we had to start wending our way back to South Africa. So probably, I think around January 1st or 2nd, we left Swakopmund, which is again on the South Atlantic coast, and we drove basically straight east. Yes, so we crossed all of Namibia, crossed into Botswana. Very efficient, no-nonsense border crossing. They're very serious about bribery in Botswana, and so, and I mean that, not that they are very against bribery, and they say, like, if anyone attempts to bribe you, like, we will call out everybody on you. And so we were staying that night in a village called Ganzi, which is also in the Kalahari, and we were staying at a place called Takadu Bush Camp. And so Ganzi was sort of a, kind of a village, and Takadu Bush Camp was, we saw a sign for it off of the paved, off of this paved road. And so we had to open a whole bunch of gates through the bush in order to get out to this camp. So we were probably off road for, let's say, like a mile and a half before we got to the camp. It was blistering hot. We had an amazing dinner of eland carpaccio and stewed Botswana spinach, and we retired to our tent for the night. So we were staying in sort of like a platform, kind of a platform tent. It had two beds, both on metal, kind of on metal cots, and then there was a canvas partition between the sleeping area and then where the bathroom, where the shower and the toilet was. So we read for a little bit, we went to sleep. I had to get up in the night to go to the bathroom, and so I flicked on my flashlight and was walking over to the partition area to the toilet, and I saw in the doorway what looked to me like a rat. And I thought, oh shit, like we're gonna, it's the bush, animals, whatever. So we'll have to take care of that in the morning when we get up. So I just went to the bathroom, came back to bed, and we woke up again, early in the morning. We were just kind of lying there, sort of talking about what was ahead of us for the day, and I heard something in the tent with us, and I said to Johan, we are not the only living things in this tent. And he reached over and picked up the flashlight and flicked it on and said, oh, hey, you want to see a snake eating a mouse? And I was like, oh, all right. And so he flashed the flashlight over to a part of, the sleeping area, about 3 feet. So just so you know, from Johan's bed. And there was a snake eating that rat that I had seen earlier in the night. And so we were like, look at that. So, we took a couple pictures. We sat there for a minute or so just kind of watching this. And then I said, sweetie, is that a black mamba? And Johan said, I was just about to say, I think that's a black mamba.
The black mamba, Dendroaspis polyepsis, is a species of extremely venomous snake native to parts of sub-Saharan Africa. They commonly grow to 10 feet, but up to 15 feet long, second longest venomous snake in the world. Species is both terrestrial and arboreal. They are speedy and can move faster than most humans can run, up to 12 miles per hour. They mainly prey on birds and small mammals, biting them and then leaving and waiting for them to die, and then they come back to eat them.
Rat.
Adult black mambas have no natural predators. They slither quickly with a third of their bodies off the ground and their heads proudly held high. So a black mamba racing along with its head nearly 4 feet in the air is terrifying and amazing. This is from Wikipedia. Skittish and often unpredictable when confronted, it is likely to engage in a threat display, gaping to expose its black mouth, there from the name. And flicking its tongue, it's also likely to hiss and spread its neck like a cobra. Any sudden movement may provoke the snake into performing a series of rapid strikes. That's why we don't like them down there, by the way.
It's like the buffalo of snakes.
Right.
Leading to, according to Wikipedia, severe envenomation. The size of the black mamba and its ability to raise its head means that mostly when it bites a human, it's in the upper body or face. Venom, the snake tends to bite repeatedly and let go, so there's multiple puncture wounds, but the venom, you can't feel it, so you just feel it tingling, so sometimes you don't know you've been bitten, until about 10 minutes later, when the early neurological signs begin, including a metallic taste, drooping eyelids, gradual symptoms of bulbar palsy, meiosis, blurred or diminished vision, paresthesia, dysarthria, dysphagia, difficulty handling oral secretions,
Truly.
an absent gag reflex, ataxia, vertigo, drowsiness, and the loss of consciousness, and respiratory paralysis, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, diarrhea, sweaty salivation, goosebumps, and red eyes. Collapse within 45 minutes, death within 7 to 15 hours.
Okay, so again, just as a reminder, 1.5 miles from the nearest tar road and about 7 hours from the capital city. So I'm going to try to wrap this up. So because Johan is African, I assumed that he, of course, would know how to save the day here. And I said, well, what should we do with this? We had a sharp-edged shovel out in Snowflake that we had brought just for this purpose, but we never thought that we would have the snake in the tent with us. We thought it might be, outside somewhere. And so as soon as it swallowed this rat, it did start to become incredibly aggressive, and it reared up just and flicked its tongue and spit at him, and he moved a cooler in between the bed and himself. And eventually it slithered behind sort of a wardrobe kind of in this partition area, and we took turns just throwing our stuff into our backpacks and hauled ass out of there into this beautiful fuchsia Botswana sunrise. Drove through to Gaborone that day, had pizza at an outdoor pizza place, and I remember thinking that pizza was the greatest thing I had ever eaten in my entire life. And we scrolled through Wikipedia reading all of this stuff, and I think that had we known all of those things at that moment, we might not have been able to respond as well as we did. Thank you very much.
No? Well, my story goes back to 1977, and the decision you'll have to make is who really was the ignorant one. So this is back when I was finishing my junior year in college at Belmont College in Nashville, Tennessee, which happens to be a Baptist college. And I had a friend named Lisa. We were both organ majors. She was music education, and I was sacred music. And everybody in our group basically was a music major, and it was led by the dean of the School of Music, who had some kind of issue with telling people what was up next, okay? So on this particular night, the group was together, and we were somewhere in there. And there happened to be this band of national instrumentalists playing. Now, Lisa was a music ed person and played a bunch of instruments, so Lisa wanted to stop and listen to the instruments. And I said, sure, fine. Now, we, being quite naive, thought that everybody else would want to listen as well, because after all, they were also musicians. So we stopped and listened and listened and listened, and finally we thought, well, we better, leave. So as we turned around thinking that everybody else would be there with us, there was actually no one. No one. No one was in sight. No one was in front of us. No one was to the left or the right. There was no one. We were in Paris. We did not speak French. It was dark. We had no idea how to get to where we were supposed to go. But what we did know is if we just kept going forward, we would eventually find them, because there was only one way to go anywhere, which would have been forward. So we started walking. No one. We started running. There was no one in sight. So finally, we did have, fortunately, a map of the city, and we found a policeman. And we tried to tell him that we were lost in English, and pointing to this map, and he was really kind, but he really couldn't help us. So we kept going, and eventually we realized the name of the subway station where our hotel was, located next to our hotel. So we finally had that word to go on. So here we were, totally lost, totally alone, and there were no cell phones. So, in fact, we didn't even have a phone number for the hotel. We could not remember the name of the hotel. So this is really challenging, but we just knew if we got to the Concord, we would be fine. We'd be able to find it just like that. So finally, someone helped us get on the subway, and we actually did arrive there. Well, when we got there, I probably should have told you this. We had kind of this thing about finding other people.
So like one time we found these U.S. Air Force men who were hanging out, they're probably our age, but they were planning a party that night. And so they had this big galvanized container filled with beer. And we were walking with them. Did I mention we were at a Southern Baptist college? So as we got on the bus, I have to digress, so this will make more sense. As we got on the bus, people were looking at us because we had evidently done something bad by walking with these servicemen. And one person said to me, "What would Claudia think of you?" That was my best friend. And I wanted to say, "But you don't know that she drinks, so I'm not sure I need to tell you that," but so I didn't. But anyway, so this was the preface to where we are now. We had been in a few adventures along the way. So we finally got to Concord, and we somehow miraculously found our hotel. And you had to remember that the dean of the School of Music did not believe in letting you know his plans for anything. You just followed him blindly. So when we got there, we were just in a little bit of trouble, just a little bit, because it was our fault that we did not know that right where the band was playing, there was a subway entrance. And everyone had gone down into the subway to go to Concord, except for Lisa and Nita. Thank you.
So, I'm always a spontaneous speaker. We weren't even sure what the topic was. It was the dangers of ignorance, the perils of bad decisions. We were trying to figure out what it was all the way here, and I'm like, "Oh man, I don't know. And she's like, "Yeah, you got lots of stories." I do. So the whole root behind my storytelling is that I'm a parent. And as a parent, you don't have a rule book. There's no rule book, and I really didn't have what I felt like a good role model. So my rule book was everything that my mom did, the opposite. You know, you got the spectrum, and somewhere you find a happy medium because you go the opposite direction, and then you're like, holy shit, that's just too extreme. And you're like, okay, maybe right here in the middle is a better thing. So most of my storytelling, all of my storytelling pretty much, was just to keep my daughter from the perils of bad decisions or the dangers of ignorance or whatever. And there's all kinds of stories I told her that me and my friends did, or things I witnessed that you're like, really? You know, or fucking brilliant. Or, oh my God, I can't believe we lived through that, you know? And so there was so many stories that she'd say, Mom, me and my friends, we wanna go out and sit in the field and just sit around a fire. There's some bales of hay and some logs and blah, blah, blah. And she goes, can I go? And I'm like, okay, after I tell you the story. And she'd always like go, okay. You know, and I'm like, seriously, you know, I tell you the story. And she's like, all right, you know, come on. And I'm like, okay. So my friends and I had the same experience. We all wanted to go out in the field. There was a bonfire. We were in high school. And we're all sitting around, and there's bales of hay and logs. Seemed like a good idea at the time. I throw that in there often. Seemed like a good idea at the time. And so, you know, we were close to being 18. We had 3.2 beer back then. 3.2 and 6%. You know, if you were 21, you got 6%. If you were 18, you got 3.2. So that gives away my age. But anyway, so, you know, some people had smuggled in some beer and some other stuff, and I had no idea what the other stuff was. But I was sitting next to my friend, and she was a basketball phenom. I'm telling you, she was like the Harlem Globetrotters. This chick lived with a basketball in her hand. Anywhere you went, she had a basketball. She had it somewhere. That basketball was like, and you know, Rhoda, she had a basketball with her. And you were just like, I'm totally amazed. Growing up with Rhoda, you just knew there was a basketball somewhere. You're not sure where it came from, but it was somewhere with Rhoda. And she was there that night, and we were all sitting around the fire. And unbeknownst to me, there was other pills and stuff going on. And I was kind of naive and young, and I mean, the biggest thing I did was sip a beer. I was like, woohoo. And so I'm sitting there talking to my friend Rhoda, and next thing you know, we're sitting on the log talking, and she face plants into the middle of the fire. And I'm talking red hot white coals, bonfire 5-6 feet across. And she face plants into the fire. And I'm a first responder. I just naturally react. And I snatched her out of the fire, and her whole face was already melted. I mean, it was like, I can't even describe how horrific it was. It was like metal, you know, would melt in this white hot fire. And so, you know, I flipped her back, and I'd been doing rough terrain rescue and rappelling, and I always have a pocket knife, which I always have a pocket knife, among other tools. And so I did a trach on my friend, and I hadn't been trained in it. I just knew it was the thing to do because her face, her lips were melted shut. Her fingers were melted together. And this is just, you know, 17 years old. I mean, I just was thinking quick and handled the situation, and I'll never forget it. And, you know, so I wanted to share this with my daughter because I didn't want her friends' perils of bad decision or whatever of ignorance, you know, decisions of ignorance. I just didn't. And so all I could do, because there's no rule book for being a parent, was to share the stupid shit that my friends and I did, and just say, hey man, you know, this is what we did. Probably won't want to try it. So, you know, I'm telling this story. Rhoda ends up living. Now, she actually had the women's NBA at several of our basketball games because she was that good. That totally changed her life. So the whole gamut of this story was to tell my daughter that quick between her trying some whatever pills they took and then drinking upon it really made a profound effect on my friend's life for her entire life. And I didn't want my daughter to make that type of, you know, mistake. So I'm sharing these decisions, and she's like, okay, Mom, all right, can I go now? And I'm like, yeah, okay, go. All right, whatever. So like several years later, my daughter's with me in a Walmart, and Rhoda walks up to us. And so she has like a little bit of hair, you know, but just so much scar tissue, and she's had like, I don't know how many, I lost count at 57 surgeries, you know, from skin grafts, and she really doesn't have lips anymore. God forgive me, but she kind of looks like a turtle out of its shell, you know, and she's real active in the community, a wonderful person, still beautiful person as ever. It didn't make her bitter or sour or anything. But my point is that she come up to me and she's like, Sparks, how you doing? We got hugs, and she's like, is this Adrienne? She's gotten so big, da 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 da. And my daughter was like really polite and talked to her, and then she walked away and she's like, Mom, all this time, I thought you were making this shit up. Just to scare me. And I'm like, how do you make this shit up? There you go.
All right. I too had a bit of trouble remembering what the topic was. And it's been stuck in my mind all month that it was when ignorance is not bliss. So, when the story came to me just the other day, I was swimming in a pond talking to my friends, and all of a sudden it was like, I've got the story. It was August 2005, and I had planned a trip to visit my two soul sisters from my years of living in Vermont. We were meeting at Rye Beach in New Hampshire. And so I'm living in Meadows of Dan, and I don't have television or anything, but my radio's on NPR 24/7, so I know what's going on in the world. And there's a blackout in New York City, if y'all remember, August of 2005. Well, I'm flying from Greensboro to Manchester, New Hampshire, with a stopover at LaGuardia in New York City. So I call early, 6 in the morning, I call down to Greensboro and I said, is the plane, are we still on? And they're like, absolutely, it's fine. I said, okay. So I get down to Greensboro and I looked the man in the eye and I said, is the plane still going? I got to, make a transfer at LaGuardia. Now, mind you, I'm not the most seasoned airline person. I tend to take trains or drive myself. And I had been to New York a few times in my life at that point. I grew up in West Virginia, just to give you a little perspective there. But I had flown to Australia just a couple years before. So, I'm like, I can make New Hampshire. This will be fine. So, but anyway, so in Greensboro, I get on the plane, and it's a propeller type. So there's about maybe 30 to 40 of us on this plane. And we're flying in New York. It's a beautiful day, blue sky. Think of 9/11, blue sky, beautiful day. And we circled around, landed at LaGuardia, and being a small prop plane, you have to walk down the steps. So I wasn't expecting that we'd be hooked up, through the passageway. So we walked down the steps, and all of a sudden I realized there's like 10,000 people standing around this airport. The doors are shut. It's blasting out loudspeakers. This airport is shut. Go home. I'm like, what the I want to be in Medicine Dan, like really bad. I'm like, what do you do? There's no bathrooms, there's no ATMs, there's nobody to answer your questions. There's 10,000 people milling around, all looking bewildered. Well, I talk to people. I'm a West Virginian, like I said. So before long, I got like 7 or 8 people gathered, and we're chatting. We have one 12-year-old girl who was flying home from Michigan to her home in, I don't know, Connecticut or Maine or somewhere, who's really crying. I mean, she's scared to death. I mean, this was the situation. And I read a lot too. And I just said to the group, I'm like, well, does anybody have anything to drink? Does anybody have some nabs? I have nabs, What are we gonna do? And I thought, from books that I've read, I said, Port Authority. This is a place, Port Authority. And there were buses running. So I said, let's hop on a bus and at least go to Port Authority, and maybe we can get a bus to New Jersey where they have power. So these poor people started following me. I mean, we had grandma from Louisiana. We had, Just we were a motley crew who'd never met. We're sharing our cell phones. Does anybody have? Of course, I have the kind with an antenna, and it works well. And we get on the bus and we make it to Port Authority. And of course, we had to pull our money too, because who travels with money unless you're of a certain age? So, like I have $50 or something besides my debit card. But a lot of people don't. I mean, I make my son, who's 38, carry a $2 bill in his wallet. It's like, you gotta have some cash once in a while, son. And here it was, the situation, the bus fare. And of course, there are no stoplights, street lights in New York, nothing, because there's no power. No one's gone to the bathroom, like how long, you're an old woman. But we get to Port Authority, and at that point, we all decided we would hop on a bus to Newark, New Jersey. And that's what we did, and got to the airport. I was able to reach my friends in New Hampshire who drove down and picked me up. It was about 3 in the morning by the time they got there, and we got everybody at least situated, something to drink, go to the bathroom, got that little girl connected, at least with her parents, who were able to get her a plane ticket for the next day. But let me tell you something. I have never flown Delta Airlines since. I got no rebate, no money, no nothing from them at all for that experience. But that is when ignorance is not bliss. Thank you.
Well, I didn't really come prepared for a story. I didn't think I had a story for this. And then after the first 2 stories, 3 stories, I sort of thought, okay, maybe I have a story. And then I got really scared, and then I gasped, and then there was another one, and I gasped again. And so now I'm a little rattled to tell anything. But let me just say, this is the story I did come up with, and it may or may not fit the bill. But I'll tell you, this was a long time ago, and I merrily got in a big old van and moved from freezing cold Minnesota to San Francisco, California, with a lot of faith and trust in Peter that this would all work out. So then we took a trip together, and I really believe that traveling with the person before you make a major commitment is a good idea, because you learn a lot when traveling together. And it didn't occur to me that Peter's style of travel would be so different from anything I'd ever experienced. So I was just a real naive, you go and, well, I didn't ever travel very much, and so this was kind of a shock when I signed on for this trip to Mexico and Guatemala. And it was all new and different how this was a trip in a third world country. It turned out that there were a lot of things that I didn't know about in terms of just, how people do things. And I'll say, as time has gone on, I've learned a lot. And we have a sign in our 79 VW van that says, "All who wander are not lost." And I'm really right there with Peter on this now. And we have a saying, "We always end up somewhere." So this is really the first time we always end up somewhere story. And that was in Guatemala. Well, Guatemala has it's an amazing place to be in the Holy Week before Easter. And Easter is huge there. It's a really amazing place. We were in Antigua, and they put on a show, an amazing display of flower petals that are done in intricate patterns on the street. And they have all these people that come out, and these men are carrying these big, huge platforms with all the statues from church. And there's this amazing droning music, and it's really special. And you have to book like a year in advance to be in Antigua for the actual Easter. We were there for Palm Sunday, and then that was the end of that. There were no more places in Antigua. So we went to Guatemala City. And that was interesting. That was, we ended up in we did end up in an interesting place where it was a hotel where they rented by the hour. We had no idea what that might be about, you know? Well, I didn't. I mean, Peter maybe figured that one out. But it was, and they moved us from one room to a different room. Because obviously they had a plan. So anyway, then it was going to be Easter. And we thought, well, for Easter, we'll go to Livingston. Well, there's a little tiny bit of Guatemala that's on a coast. And this is down in the Caribbean. And so we thought, well, we'll go to the coast. This will be fun. It'll be nice. It'll just be relaxing. Well, we get to Livingston. That's the little village, town where you go on the coast. And it was a real fine place, except for all of Guatemala City that can go goes to Livingston. And they book a year in advance. There was nothing. Now, I am very lucky. Peter's Spanish is quite good. And Peter is so resourceful at finding places. He can find a place better than anybody, I think. And so he starts scouring. He's talking to everybody he can. Do you have a place? Do you know anybody? Do you have a place? Do you know anybody? Do you have a place? And finally, he gets us a place. Well, let's just say ignorance is not always a good idea when you're traveling, because where we ended up was in the backyard, and it had a roof, and it had walls, screens all the way around, and it had a bed, but the bed was broken, and it was just a single bed, and it really wasn't like a twin-size bed. No, it was just like a cot-size bed, and it was broken, but it had a mattress, and it had a table. So we took the mattress, and we put it on the table, and you know, who knows what was in this mattress? We didn't even think about that. But there we were, two people, and we're lucky we're not really long or really big. I mean, you know, we could make it sort of work. So we agreed. Anytime you're going to turn, you have to let the other one know. Because we were not going to be on the floor because somebody flips. And then it started to rain. And it didn't just rain, it poured. And it poured. And there was so much water out there that you couldn't get from the little bed to the bathroom, the outhouse. You had up to your ankles or higher in just water. And so, you know, you just go out the door and you just add to it. And it was unbelievable. And so let me just finish by saying we survived. It was not easy, but it was the hardest trip I've ever taken with Peter. It was a learning experience, and we always end up somewhere is so true. And I can tell you, it was some of the best food that we had on that whole trip was in Livingston. And the image of those people carrying it was so crazy, with the little angels, and they had little cotton balls stuck on their wings. And I mean, it was unusual. It was not Antigua. It was different. And so that is my story. There are no gasps.